Only the strongest leaves this fascinating conflict from my entertainment. Hilarious. Oh, special battle just for me. A vitality boost. Another challenger. Another enemy. Game of darts. Oh. Gravity. The stink of battle.
Hello and welcome Exiles to my Life Abyss Stacking Ascendant. Now this build can be played with pretty much any physical spell your heart desires, kind of just up to you what you like. I like Ethereal Knives, that's what I use for the majority of mapping, and then I also use Stormburst because it's just a lot better for bossing. Now, before we get into the mechanics of the build, I do want to mention that I'm going to have a POB. It's not like a fully fleshed out, this is more of a semi-guide. I'm not really going to handhold you on this one. If you want to play the build, go for it. I'm giving you the tools for basically some leveling trees, and then I am writing a very brief note section, which is pretty much just don't mess these things up, and you won't randomly die. This should take care of the you randomly die situation, and what I recommend for leveling, which is I level as Relic of the Pact. As long as this thing gets cheap enough, I think it would be great for leveling. Relic of the Pact, I remember leveling with it. It was just a complete breeze. And I recommend using these supports along with Essence Worm if you want to do Relic of the Pact leveling. And quite frankly, when I was planning this build originally, I had planned around using it as a Relic of the Pact build. Just so you know, there is a mod you can get on wands that gives you reduced reservation efficiency. That allows you to hit the 1-tick breakpoint for maximum damage, maximum AoE. And if you can roll that on a Relic of the Pact, this build will honestly be pretty crazy with it, and I was planning to do that up until I realized how hard it is to roll unique. So that's just a little side note. Now let's get into the actual character. So first things first, I want to break down something that's very, very, very important, which is the mechanics of dissolution of the flesh and the fact we're doing petrified blood. A lot of people will comment, hey man, your life pool makes me nervous. You're always on the edge of death. Does this build a glass cannon? And the answer to all that is no, it's not a glass cannon. It's not really a glass cannon at all. And we're not on the edge of death at all when we're playing the game. So first things first, dissolution of the flesh. This thing gives us a massive multiplier on our HP pool, and it changes how we die. It changes the die condition, essentially from enemies damaging you and hitting your red life pool to enemies damaging you and they reserve your life. So essentially what you need to look at and what you need to care about is your life pool being reserved, not this red bar here. I'm using a shield called Wrath Pith, which essentially spends life every single time I cast, but it can never kill us. The sacrifice mod can never actually take your last HP pool. It will never be the reason you die. So essentially when you're watching this footage and my life pool is at 1, I'm nowhere close to dead because my reservation pool is completely open. And hopefully that makes some sense. Hopefully that explains a little bit. Now, we're going to get a little bit more confusing now because I'm using petrified blood. The reason for this is it's basically a massive multiplier to our effective hit pool. Essentially what it does is it splits damage into 60% of the damage is damage that's going to hit you and reserve life, and 40% of the damage is going to hit you and then become degen on your red life pool, which you can die to. Now, this is perfectly counterbalanced and completely countered. All you need to do is get recoup about 31% to be exact. If you have a 2023 Petrified Blood or a 2120 Petrified Blood or even a 2020 Petrified Blood, all you need is 31% recoup and you will not die to this degen. It will be perfectly counterbalanced. If you don't have the recoup, well, you're randomly going to die even though your life isn't being reserved, and you're going to wonder why, and that's why. It's because the Petrified Blood, a portion of the damage is becoming that degen. All you need to know is get recoup, either have 2 rings with T1 life recoup and some fertile catalyst, or 1 ring with life recoup and then anoint infused flesh. Now, if you anoint Infused Flesh, you won't have as good uptime on your Writhing Jar. If you're not doing like high-end bosses all the time, this doesn't really matter. This is only important in boss fights. Basically, Writhing Jar is how we generate spirit charges and keep them up in a boss fight. And quite frankly, if you're doing EK, you don't end up keeping up the charges, but if you're doing something like Stormburst, which is what I end up swapping into, this skill doesn't use charges unless I stop and start recasting again, which essentially means we can pretty much maintain permanent maximum spirit charges while we're bossing. So I'll go over that in a little bit, but hopefully I'm making sense here. Dissolution of the Flesh changes how you die. The main thing you need to know is you want to get recoup. Now, why is Petrified Blood a multiplier? Well, essentially, it is making each... It makes enemies only deal 60% of their damage to you instead of dealing the full 100%. So they have to hit you, if you divide the number by 0.4, that's how much the multiplier is that they have to hit you harder for. Because, anyways, point is, they have to hit you quite a bit harder. And even though we're reserving some life to have Petrified Blood in our build, it actually effectively makes our HP pool bigger in terms of how much damage enemies have to deal to us, as well as it helps us perfectly sustain pain attunement and always be on low life for that damage multiplier. So that's why we're using Petrified Blood in the build. Hopefully that makes some sense. All right, next up on the agenda, the other thing I need to make sure you guys know how to do is when you're playing a build with Petrified Blood and with Dissolution of Flesh, you need to solve specifically, you need to solve 4 ailments. You need to solve Poison, you need to solve Ignite, you need to solve Bleed, and you need to solve Corrupted Blood. If you don't solve these, you're going to have a bad time. Basically, because this says if you go 2 seconds without taking damage, you get your life pool back. The problem is, if you have an enemy hit you with poison damage, that poison will last 2 seconds. So it's no longer you're waiting 2 seconds. If you're fighting a monster with a bunch of monsters that have poison, every time they hit you, their poison's going to last for 2 seconds. Once the poison ends, you have to wait another 2 seconds. So it greatly extends the amount of time it takes for your life pool to pop back up to full, which is a very bad time. So you need to solve this. How do we solve it? Well, very easily, you get poison avoidance on your jewel. If you get 50% and you get 50% bleed avoidance, you can get capped avoid with 1 jewel socket. That being said, if you don't have 100%, if you can't afford 100% effect of Abyssal Jewels, all you really need to do is get like a mid-tier roll and then get another mid-tier roll on a second jewel, on an extra jewel here and there. You just need to make sure you're capping Poison Avoid, Bleed Avoid, and those are solved. The other thing you need is 1 jewel with Corrupted Blood immunity. That solves that. And last but not least, we need to solve Ignite. Now for Ignite, we do a situation where we have less duration of Ignite on you, and we have a reduced duration of ailments on us with the boots. This is pretty much good enough to make Ignite not a problem, but if you want to go the extra mile, you can also cap your Ignite avoidance as well. If you're still getting annoyed and dying to Ignite, I didn't really notice dying to Ignite pretty much ever, so it wasn't an issue with me, and the less duration plus the reduced duration was plenty to mitigate it in my case. So that solves that. Aside from that, there is what mods do you get on Abyssal Jewels? T1 is life, T2 is cast speed if you've crit recently, this is a lot of damage, crit multi if you've killed recently, this is a lot of damage, and movement speed if you've killed recently, that's a lot of feels good. Those are the primary mods I recommend getting. You'll notice in my build, I have roughly around 2 to 3 stat jewels, depending on where I have the jewel socket. I didn't go super hard on these jewels, I didn't min-max these jewels. There's a lot of power in the jewels if you invest further into the build, but it's not necessary to make the build pop off. The build will do well just with 2 to 3 stat jewels, quite frankly, and you can get that pretty easily just by buying a few random fractures here and there, throwing some chaos, or just sniping some jewels on trade. Okay, so that goes over Abyssal Jewels. I'm going to go ahead and swap these back in here. Also, I would recommend, I have Freeze Avoid via my jewels, and I'm running Lunaris. I would ultimately recommend just going Brine King, get Freeze Avoid there, and get Reduced Effective Chill, because Chill can be pretty annoying, and I don't have any reduction effective chill, so whenever I get a chilled ground map, it's really annoying, and I probably would rather just have this and be happy with my setup. Okay, also, Burn Ground, super annoying. You solve it with this. Desecrated Ground, another map mod. I honestly would just recommend rolling over the map. You can run Desecrated maps. You have to be a little bit more careful about where you're standing and stuff. But it's just, honestly, it's kind of annoying, and I would rather roll over that map, but that's just my 2 cents. Okay, gonna go ahead and throw these jewels back in here, and back in here. Next up, the important thing is, how are we generating rage? How does our character have such good time on Berserk? It's all via Calm Spirit. Since our character's stacking so much life all we need is a bit of percent regen on the tree, and that regen gets translated into rage generation. We have this from Sanctity, we have this from Warrior's Blood, we have this from Brink of Death, we have this from Golem's Blood. You can see what I'm saying. There's a lot of nodes that randomly just have a little bit of percent regen, and it actually adds up quite a bit to having enough rage regen to have very good uptime on your Berserk. It's not like perfect permanent uptime. You can't really get perfect permanent uptime, but it's pretty freaking good. You can almost clear an entire map before your Berserk runs out if you activate it from the start. It's the kind of situation we're looking at. Not quite, but close. And Berserk also gives you 30% less damage taken. No, 20% less damage taken, so it's a nice boost of extra tank. Another thing I should note on this build is, you might look at our resistances, and you might think, man, that's a lot of bad chaos res. Do you die to cast damage? No, not really. Our character has 15,000 HP, about 11k unreserved with Petrified Blood, which essentially means our base one-hit threshold, our base EHP, is roughly about 20,000. Most builds get to about 5k if they have 75 res, which pretty much means that chaos isn't really a problem. You kind of get what I'm saying. For the most part, chaos is annoying. If I spent more time actually gearing my character, I could get chaos res cap, but even if you have bad chaos res, don't worry, the build pretty much works even though you might not have good chaos res. Also, you might say, hey, you don't have armor. Well, quite frankly, even if there's builds that have 50k armor and they're 5k life, I can take a bigger fizz hit than they can. Because the way armor works is, if there's a physical hit, like a Shaper Slam, for example, a very big fizz hit starts to greatly reduce how much armor actually mitigates. And our HP pool is starting at 20k HP. For a 5k life build to have a similar result in a physical hit, they would need to reduce the physical hit by 75% to have a similar result in how much they can take in one hit. And for the most part, when it comes to actual big physical hits, most of those builds don't do that. Granted, there are builds that get crazy armor and they will go past that, but I just want you to know, it's not a situation where we aren't tanky against Fizz. We were pretty tanky against Fizz. I just try to hammer this point home that having the level of HP pool we have is actually really a pretty big powerhouse in terms of defenses, even if we don't have defensive layers on top of it. We do have Berserk, we do have 10% less damage taken in Strength of Blood, we do have some defensive layers, but we don't have a lot of the overkill stuff because we just don't need it. All right, next up, Strength and Blood. Why do we use this? This is granted to you by Calm. If you have a different person here, you could have something like Chainbreaker. I had somebody ask me, how do you fix the rage cost? They accidentally had a Chainbreaker keystone here. Just make sure, if you're allocating this node, make sure it's Strength and Blood. And what do you need for this? You need Leech. You can get Leech on the helmet slot, or you could force it in via a Cluster Jewel, or you could force it in via a Amulet Corruption. There's a few different places you could get a bit of Leech, but you just basically need Leech for cold, lightning, or fire, and that will always give you Strength and Blood for a little bit of mitigation. It's not necessary. You can go without this node and save yourself the point. I still think Lethal Pride is worth, just because you can get HP or regen on 3 notables, which is pretty good, along with the fact you get a lot of flat strength with this, which helps get you quite a bit of HP. For us, it's about a 1k HP boost. Honestly, if you just get an Abyssal Jewel, that'd be good too, but I think Lethal Pride is usually the play. That being said, we have Unnatural and Lethal Pride. I think if you can't afford Unnatural, you shouldn't probably do the Lethal Pride. I think this takes away a lot of the value you get out of a Lethal Pride because you're losing all the flat strength from it, in which case, just do 2 Abyssal Sockets. You're going to get the pen, you're going to get the percent life, you're going to get the gain fizzes extra, and that will probably, honestly, for all I know, it might even be better than this. I didn't really test out one versus the other, but it probably has the ability to be competitive. All right. That's that. Now for how are we scaling this build? Gain fizzes extra from spirit charges. That's when we kill worms, we get these spirit charges. Every time we use the skill, we emit the spirit burst that spends a spirit charge. You see that this goes down as we use it. These things will clear maps. I'll showcase that in a map at the end of the video. And then on top of that, we also have penetration for Abyssal Jewels, and then we have cast speed from our Abyssal Jewels and crit from our Abyssal Jewels if you have those stats. What are we missing? We're missing percent damage and percent crit. Well, Wrath Pith solves both of those. Its downside can get negated by Dissolution of Flesh, and Dissolution of Flesh also pairs greatly with this item because it scales the amount of damage we get. With our 15,000 life pool, this item is giving us roughly about 750% increased spell damage and 750% increased crit chance. It roughly solves both of those scaling vectors and helps us make a well-rounded build in terms of damage scaling. On top of that, how do we solve the fact we lost our 6-link here? Pretty simply, we awaken our orb, more spell damage with increased crit damage. On top of that, you're just going for a open prefix. If you don't hit an open prefix, you can try to annul, or you can just get a different wand. I recommend Pagan Wand because it has a slow int requirement. Profane Wand has better cast speed, but it requires 237 int. We don't really get that in this build unless you start forcing int onto your gear, which I wouldn't recommend. So quite frankly, I'd recommend a Pagan Wand, or even you could go for a Scepter with percent damage, or just something that requires less int, and you can Awaken or Orb to get those 2 mods and then craft on +2 supports. That being said, when you want to min-max the build a bit more, I highly recommend check out my videos on how to craft Crucible. But basically what you want to do is you want to transfer on support gem or socketed spell gems and more cast speed. You want to transfer that onto the weapon. If you want to super min-max the build, you could try to get fancy. You could go for Fizz the Lightning, you could go for Pen, you could go for Chain, you could go for all these extra supports. There's quite a lot of them there that you could add, and quite frankly, I think at base, the +2 and the more cast speed is plenty to do all basically the main game content. If you want to min-max it more, then you could go and try to craft out a really good base before you even go for the Awaken Orb. That is up to you. All right. So that's the weapon craft. As for supports, as for what do I have here, simply, I like EK. That's what I map with. You can do any physical spell. Just fine-tune it to what you're doing. For me, EK felt fantastic for mapping, and that's what I played for 90% of the character. The other 10%, when I wanted to do a boss like an Uber, or I wanted to do a Feared, or I wanted to do an Invitation, all I would do, I would keep in power, and I'd swap Spell Echo for Stormburst, and I'd swap Ethereal Knives for increased duration. You'll notice in the PUB, I have a tree that says 97 Stormburst and 97 no Stormburst. The only difference is, with Stormburst, you grab these duration nodes simply to hit a breakpoint on Stormburst, which is, the Stormburst duration is 2.8 seconds. The way this skill works is you get a tick of damage for every 0.4 second of duration, and at 2.8 is a breakpoint, and if you don't spec these nodes, you don't hit that breakpoint, so it's usually worth it to hit that breakpoint. It's like a pretty big damage jump. You don't have to do Stormburst. That's just what I recommend for single target because of how it works with spirit charges. You can constantly be casting the kill skill, dealing damage, and generating your charges up, and maintain 15 charges on the boss, which is a big boost of damage, versus if you were to do something like Ethereal Knives, you would always be spending those charges down. You'd be in the boss fight, but you'd be spending the charges down. And if you do a really tanky boss, that starts to matter. If you're doing something like a Guardian or just any T16, you'll mow down the boss before you even get down to 10 charges. It's not going to be a big deal. But if you do a really tanky boss like an Uber, then you're going to want something like Stormburst so you can maintain those charges. Okay, hopefully that makes some sense. Hopefully I'm doing okay at explaining the setup for the character. Now I'm going to go ahead and showcase what I mean in terms of mapping, in terms of playstyle. Right now we have a reuse flask just simply for capping our res. This just saves you a lot on gearing. If you gear it really well, you could probably go for a more optimal, higher damage flask or something. I'll leave that up to you. But I just did a bismuth and I'm just living life and I'm loving it. All right, let's go ahead and do a just a real quick map here. We'll grab some random beach. This map has gain life is extra, avoid elemental ailments, some other crap, who knows. We'll go ahead and run it. Wait, okay, I actually want to say one thing real quick. If you see a map mod that says less recovery rate, I wonder if I could just like, if I search less recovery rate, I wonder if it'll come up. If I try to like find one that has less recovery rate. Less cooldown, dang it. Any other maps that would have less recovery rate on? Okay. Anyways, if you run a map that has less recovery rate or something that affects your ability to recoup damage, all you need to do is turn off Petrified Blood. If it has less recovery rate, you will run the map and you will get hit by damage and your recoup won't actually work. So just turn this off and you can run 96% less recovery rate. It's no big deal. You can run no regen maps. It's no big deal. You can run reflective maps if you spec some reduction in reflect. I've just been skipping reflect maps. I don't want to spend the points to get immunities to that. And then the one other map mod that's annoying is Desecrated Ground, which I usually just avoid because it's annoying to play around. If you 100% can do the maps, you just have to make sure you're standing in like not Desecrated Ground and stuff, and it's a little bit more annoying. But that's just a personal thing. Now, I want to showcase spirit charges. They can clear monsters. They can't really do enough single target to kill rares or kill a boss. You're not... They supplement your clear. They're not going to carry your clear. So we have spirit charges, and if I'm like shield charging around, you can see monsters will die, and we have what, gain 50% of his life is extra. Monsters will die except for like the rare. You see the rare is left over, so it's something where it's fantastic for a little bit of extra supplemental clear, right? It is killing monsters, but it's not going to do the whole shebang of actually killing the harder, tankier rares or harder, tankier blue mobs if they have some sort of mitigations. It's something that is meant, simply put, for a little bit of extra supplemental clear. That being said, I have a 2 link on it that doesn't give me damage at all. If you went for a 3 socket helmet and you gave it damage links, it probably starts to kill rares, but it doesn't help you out as much on clear. But that's kind of up to you if you want to play around with that. I just wanted to say Spirit Burst, it's not doing nothing, but it's not carrying the build either. It's aesthetically pleasing in my opinion, and I do enjoy using it because it's kind of fun to play with. It's got some good aesthetics to it. Alright, so that is what it looks like. You see I got down to 13 charges. That's what I'm talking about when you're facing a boss that doesn't have... Like, it's not a crazy HP pool. You're not going to be hamming on it forever. You can maintain spirit charges. It's only when you get to those really tanky monsters, like you get some giga-juiced, unique Crucible mob, then you are starting to think, man, I wish I had Stormburst here. You can still kill him with EK. Sometimes I disengage, go kill a pack, come back and start fighting him again, stuff like that. But work out what feels good for you. I personally think this build feels very good to play, very good clear speed. It's just a matter of you have to get a little bit used to the dissolution of flesh playstyle, get used to paying a little bit more attention to your life pool when it's getting reserved, and simply put, when you're running, when your life pool is getting reserved down and down and down, just disengage, just back up, let the 2 seconds go by, and then just get right back into the thick of it and start destroying some monsters. Okay. I'll also give a showcase of Stormburst, because I don't think I had a Stormburst showcase clear in the actual video. And I will say this, I have damage links on my shield because I have a Stormburst mod on my shield. This, I think, is something that helps fix the clear for Stormburst. It doesn't make or break the clear, but it makes it feel quite a bit better, in my opinion, to have enemies kind of get sucked in. So that is what we have on our Wrathpith. And I'll go ahead and give a little showcase here on, I guess, a Castle Ruins, why not, of what it looks like to do clear with Stormburst. Say you were going to play this instead of playing EK at all. We'll give a little showcase. This is going to be with Temporal Chains. So we're going to get slowed down a little bit because Temp Chains makes players run like 10% less speed or 10% less action speed or whatever it is. But still should give you a good idea of what it would look like if you were to play with a Stormburst setup solely and not EK. If you didn't want to swap gems at all, this is what it would look at like. As I get stuck on a few different walls here. Fantastic. But it's not like you're gonna have an issue clearing packs. You pretty much kind of can one tap around. Your Gravity Sphere will end up killing monsters wherever it spawns usually. And the big difference about the trigger Gravity Sphere is it's pretty much Void Spear, but instead of having a 10-second cooldown, it has a 1.5-second cooldown or something. It just triggers way more easily. And thus, most of the times, whenever you're casting your skill, you are able to get that off on a monster or on a pack. And then by the next pack, you'll have had the 1.5-second cooldown stopped, and you'll be able to proc it again. Okay, so hopefully this gives you guys a good idea of what this character is. This isn't a full guide, but it should give you the tools necessary to put together a character if you would like to. I really like this character. I think it's pretty freaking good, and I can highly recommend it to you. And until next time, I have some good builds planned. Hopefully next one will be just completely broken, but we'll see. As always, thanks for watching. Take care, Exiles, and peace out.